Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Awaaz in Focus, an initiative of Azad Awaaz. This monthly patrika focuses on marginalized sections of society whose voices are often muted in the cacophony of flashy mainstream media discourse. When talking about marginalization, this platform does not only aim to focus on caste and religion alone, but also aspires to include discussions on class, gender identity, environmentalism, and more. In this edition of Azad Awaaz, we explore the state of journalism in contemporary India. It delves into various aspects, including concerns expressed by students and journalists, evolving censorship trends, strategies to navigate challenges, and the future of the industry amidst ongoing censorship issues and the importance of media literacy. For this episode of Awaaz in Focus, we're thrilled to welcome Professor Surekha Deepak to our discussion. Professor Surekha is an assistant dean at the Indian Institute of Journalism and New Media, Bangalore. Throughout her 12 years of experience in the electronic media, she's worked on both television shows and the film industry. She helped set up the different regional language satellite channels that Inadu TV established. Along with being connected to numerous NGOs, she's also written and directed a number of documentaries. At the Sri Sri Center for Media Studies, she created and oversaw the television production course. Professor Surekha has also given numerous workshops on media literacy, misinformation, and fact checking for students from various institutions. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining us today for this conversation.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. Nice to meet you too.
So, with that, I think I'll get into the questions. So, the first question I want to ask you is, as a journalism professor specializing in the in media literacy, could you share some insights into the common concerns or worries expressed by students or journalists in your training sessions regarding the journalism industry today?
Okay, so if we look at what we have in the media, I think one of the main concerns that comes up, especially in the workshop and with students, is to do with the availability of news itself, because a lot of them get news that's already coming with a certain bias. And I think the question is, where can you then access unbiased news? That's something that is a cause of concern for many. It's also, I think, based on where people access news. And a lot of young people and a lot of people now get their news from social media and let's say non-traditional media. So given that, it's difficult to actually know that everything that they are consuming is authentic or is fact-checked or is factual. Actually, the word is factual.
No, Professor, I completely agree with you. Even amongst my old classmates, I can see a very like drastic shift in the form of ways my parents and grandparents consume like news, and like my generation is most of us resorting to either the social media or non-traditional methods as you suggested to consume media. Moving on to my next question for you, have you observed any evolving trends or patterns in censorship practices within the Indian media industry? If so, how do you address these developments?
Just to add to that earlier point about, when you're talking about how you consume news, it's also easier to believe what you get on, a forward that's come from your friend or a trusted source, right? So it's somehow more difficult to bring in a bit of critical thinking or into that equation when you already trust the source who's sending you this information. And I think coming to your next question about the patterns of censorship in Indian media, it's, I think, very closely linked to, at least with the mainstream media, very closely linked to ownership. About who owns the media, where does this censorship coming. I don't know if it's a combination of external censorship as well as self-censorship. Because in the media, it's not just what they cover, but also what you don't cover. A lot of times news is not reported, and that in itself is very telling. When you choose not to report, sometimes when I'm looking for data, for instance, even something as simple as development indices, what was available more easily in the past now has become like you really have to search through and find. So I think the idea of censorship is something that is coming also from the media itself, where they're more hesitant to question, um, to uh, to raise even issues about who owns the media, right? Who owns the media organization that they're working in. Yeah, and also we have this like the scenario in the media where I don't, again, it's to do with ownership, but there isn't very much investment in investigative journalism, in the kind of in-depth stories that we would like to see. So in a sense, when I say that you're not bringing out and you're not um, telling us uh, a large portion of what should have been or would have been covered in the past, I think that's also a form of censorship. I think there's also some interference that is coming from the state. When you look at some media houses that have been targeted with ED raids and instances like that, which also talks about an indirect form of um, censorship from the state. So there is that. I think there's also a question of like you said, when you mentioned internet being a major source of news, when you ban the internet, that in itself is then you have access to nothing. And that's a worrying trend. I think in India, for a couple of years, we've had the longest bans, especially in troubled states. So that, is also a question of censorship. How do you get access to anything at all? That's complete blackout.
Yes, Professor, with the lack of the internet, it's concerning and hard to have access. I think building off of what you just spoke about, what strategies do you recommend to aspiring as well as working journalists and media professionals in India to navigate censorship challenges when they're fulfilling their role in informing the media and holding people who are in power accountable?
Well, that's one of the main things, right? What journalism is supposed to do is to hold people, hold power accountable. Given I know in it's easy to say do a good job and you'll get published, and but we've seen instances where media houses have had to take down stories because it offended somebody or they didn't like what was happening. But again, I'd like to say that the internet is a double-edged thing, right? It also affords a lot of freedom, right? So I would recommend that, if you're looking for places where you can have stories published that are a lot more balanced, it would be to look for independent news organizations or find freelance work. Again, it's easier said than done, but it's also possible ways of getting your stories published, even in the mainstream. I don't know if it's in such a place where you can get nothing published, but I think to find a line and see how you can still push boundaries. But given that there are a lot of a growing number of online media houses, if you're looking at the News Minute in the South, for example, you have uh, uh, organizations in Kerala, you have um, Wire, Scroll, all of these. I mean, at least the Wire, I don't know about Scroll now, but we have a lot of these organizations that are doing the kind of stories and without without that level of internal censorship. So there is hope, and I think that's where the hope is, that you will get stories published. It'll still be out, and somewhere it'll make a difference.
No, I agree with you, Professor. Is there anything you'd like to add to how an individual should sort of navigate through dealing with censorship while they're working at one of these places? How they should maybe go about the process of approaching censorship in general?
Uh, I don't know what you mean by censorship in general, because if you're working within a media house, there is a certain hierarchy and there are certain frameworks within which you have to work. So there is a lot of leeway in terms of what you can get away with, but some things will just not see the light of day. That's about it. But I think in the day-to-day working, you can still report. Yeah, having said that, it is well, again, like I'm saying, it depends on where you're working and how much.
Sorry, Professor, you froze there for a second. But
Could you hear me now? Is it
yes,
okay?
yes, it's all right now.
Okay.
Okay, I think finally looking ahead, what do you envision as the future of journalism in India amidst ongoing concerns about censorship and the need for media literacy? How can educators and society at large work together to address these challenges? Also, what role can academic institutions play in this regard?
Future of journalism, I think, is very closely linked to the future of democracy in the country. Can't the two. And the role of media and what's coming ahead, very, very, very connected, because I don't know if I need to explain how basic it is. Like you just mentioned, if you're talking about holding power accountable or you're holding anybody accountable for anything, if you don't have a media that is allowed to play the watchdog, then we are questioning the very functioning of democracy itself, right? So it's really important that we do have, a strong and vibrant media in the country. Although a lot of indices show that it's really important to still keep the efforts of uh, doing good journalism going, and keep it going. The next part of your question was, I think, related to media literacy um, and what educators can do. I think as media educators, what we can do is, of course, talk about. I'm separating media literacy from journalism because I think they're two different things a little bit. So with journalism itself, I think there is a need to be to know what the standards are, as to, if you come out and as a fresh journalist, if you don't know what is expected in, or what's a good story, about the need to be impartial, for fairness, for balance, for verification. If you don't know what's the best practices, then there's no way we're going to get back any hold in society, right? So for journalists or would-be journalists, I would think at least to know what. So if you know what the standards are and then you know you've slipped a bit, there's a hope, right? If you don't know anything and you think you can just do one-sided stories and that's all it is, then we're a little bit more in trouble. So I think that's that I would say is the thing for journalists, to try and still stick to the basics of journalism, so you don't allow biases and stuff like that into your stories. With media literacy, I think there it's important that it's not just the ones who are putting out the story, but also the ones who are consuming the story, right? So anybody who has access to a smartphone and is accessing media from whatever, WhatsApp to Facebook to Insta to whatever, everybody needs to be media literate. Because also if you look at a time like this during elections, when we have like the most amount of dubious news, fake news, some of it is intentional, some of it is just put out. There is a need for everyone to stop and think and see, what they're consuming and also what they're forwarding. So it's a double-sided thing. So it's that I think is really important. And that is a challenge, because sometimes we may know that we're off, there's something off or something is not right about it, but there needs to be a thinking process to figure out what it is. And there's some work needed, and most people are reluctant to do that. So it's just, oh, I find this, spoof or this meme of a certain politician funny, so I'll forward it. What you're doing is like creating stereotypes, right? And that's sort of a problem. So it's important that everyone, not just journalists, not just people in the newsrooms, but everyone is media literate. I think that's what I'd say, yeah.
And Professor, what role do you think academic institutions can play in this regard?
I think creating this awareness, when I say academic institutes, I think it's at all levels. I think it can start with schools, where we're bringing this awareness of media literacy, of bringing in this ability to question and to, before you believe every piece of, we're living in a world of AI where you have AI generating images, videos, so you can't believe everything you see, and even if it's a video, right? So we need a bit of discernment in accepting what you see and what you receive. And I think that ability to critically think and look at information is something that we can bring. And I think it's really important to bring from, like, from schools possibly. And that's the role I think a lot of media academic institutions have, to bring in this awareness.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Surekha Deepak, for joining us today. This was a very informative session. And thank you to everyone listening to us. If this is your first time tuning into Awaaz, please make sure you check out our website to go over the other segments that we worked on. Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you, Sampada. Thank you. It was a joy being here. Thank you.